On March 21st, the Walla Basin Watershed Council hosted a Western Water 101 workshop centering on water rights, trusts, and transactions. Guest speakers were Luke Martin, North Central Regional Water Master for District 23 in Oregon, and Sarah Dymecki, Senior Project Manager for the nonprofit organization Washington Water Trust. The following video is a recording of the presentation and Q&A session of this event. Participants were made aware of the recording in progress. In the video's description below, you can find links to the resources listed in the presentation, along with contact information for both speakers and Emily.Tilden, the Walla Basin Watershed Council's Outreach Specialist. Start the recording, and Luke is going to start with his presentation.
Thank you, Emily. So as Emily said, I'm Luke Martin. I'm the Water Master for District 23, which is the district for basically the Walla Basin in Oregon. And I'm going to keep it all pretty brief. So I'm just going to kind of talk about water rights in general, and then touch briefly on some in-stream leases and in-stream transfers, and then pass it on to Sarah. So Oregon water law was established in 1909, I believe. There's a lot of myths around water rights. I get a lot of questions, people saying, well, I'm grandfathered in, I've owned this property for 60 years, we've always used water this way. It's a pretty common thing I run into. And I just, to make it very clear, there's no such thing as what many people would often call a grandfathered water right. You get that a lot. Aren't I grandfathered in? Because I've been here 50 years, we use the same well. It doesn't exist. If you do not have a paper water right, a certificate to use water, you do not have the right to use water in the state of Oregon. So Oregon, the water in the state of Oregon is a public resource. So it's essentially, for lack of a better term, owned or controlled by the state of Oregon. And so without that certificate, the department's job, my job, is to turn people off for using water improperly. So if you're using too much water, using water on the wrong land, that's essentially what we do. There are some exempt uses. The main one would be domestic exempt use for domestic wells, the most common one. There are some commercial exempt uses if you're below like 5,000 gallons a day. If I'm sure a lot of you either have or know folks with wells that live out in the county, that you got your lawn, you take your showers, you do your laundry, that's your domestic exempt use, right? So as long as you're not blowing past that 15,000 gallon a day limit on domestic use, you're okay, which is pretty hard to do. And it also limits you to half an acre of land that you can irrigate. And that is for non-commercial purposes. That's another common one, is folks watering a blueberry patch with their domestic well and putting up a U-pick sign. You can't do that. You can only water something and sell it if you have a water right. You cannot sell produce that you water with your domestic exemption. The domestic exempt use is for your use only. It's for your household use. So that's probably one of the more common ones. There's an article just last week, I think, in OPB about that, about the department turning someone's water off that was watering like half an acre of, I think, berries or something like that, and selling them. Again, it's one of the more common questions I get.
So what would they need to do in order to make it legal?
They would have to get a water right. So yeah, that's really, there is no exemption for selling crops that you're growing using water from domestic exempt use. So
And what's the is that easy to do?
It is not generally easy to do. And in our basin right now, we actually have, they've called it a serious water management problem area, meaning that basically groundwater rights are kind of frozen for the time being, meaning no one's getting any new groundwater rights. And pretty much all the surface water rights or surface water resources are already over allocated. So there really aren't new water rights, at least generally speaking. I can't say in every situation they would not go through, but generally speaking, there isn't a lot of new water in this basin to be allocated. That's not true statewide, but for this basin, it's generally true. Again, I can't say in every circumstance that's what's going to happen, but so just to that, the Oregon water law is is based on a principle called prior appropriation. So prior appropriation is based on first in time, first in right. So if you established your water right with use in, say, 1872, and your neighbor established their use in 1875, you would be the senior water user. So the 1872 user would be senior, meaning they have the senior call. And that is the other type of water law that is related to that is called riparian law. So that would be like if you're just on a stream and you throw your pump in the stream and you pump the water. That's riparian. There's not really, it's more who's in order, right? If you're upstream, go ahead and take the water. In Oregon, we don't have that. We have prior appropriation, which means first in time, first in right. So that's a lot of my day-to-day job is in the summertime, there's a lot of small streams where someone at the top of the stream has a water right from 1892 and someone at the bottom has a water right from 1867. And so the person with the old water right calls me and says, I'm not getting my water. So I have to go turn off anyone who's junior to them to get them their senior water. So that is kind of the boots on the ground, how water law works in Oregon. It can be similar with groundwater, but it's a lot more complicated. Let's put it that way. So just because the water flows by your house, and that's kind of the prior appropriation doctrine, just because there's a stream going by your house does not mean you have the right to appropriate the water of that stream. You have to have a water right.
So who do we get a hold of if this is a problem?
You talk to me. So I have business cards over here.
Okay.
And I'm the only water resources department staff in Milton Free Water. We have staff in Pendleton, that's our regional office, but I'm located here locally. And so if you had any questions about anything local, I'd be the first point of contact. And then if you have questions about really anything my department does, you're welcome to reach out to me. And if you have questions on transfers or applying for a water right or anything like that, I can point you in that direction and get you the resources you need. So,
Okay.
yeah. And then, just a couple quick, these are just really big questions I get. Probably one of the biggest, scariest questions I get is, can I lose my water right? And that you can is the short answer. What the longer answer is a little more complicated. So generally speaking, I haven't seen any water rights get canceled. I've been with the department 4 years and it hasn't happened since I've been here in this area, at least that I know of. So what it would require is if somebody does not use their water, and then it doesn't have to be their full water right. If you have 10 acres and you only water 9 for 5 years straight, and that 1 acre is dry that whole time, somebody could potentially file an affidavit of non-use on that 1 acre and have that 1 acre dried up on your water right. That's generally how that process works. There's 3 ways to cancel a water right. There's a voluntary cancellation. So that's usually involved with a transfer where someone says, hey, I want to move this water right from here to there. And through that process, I look at it or someone in Salem and we say, well, you can do that, but this water right has to be canceled first in order for these transactions to go through. So there's such a thing as a voluntary cancellation, which is someone doing it on their own. There's an affidavit of cancellation, meaning just somebody fills out an affidavit to cancel a water right. It could be any water right. And then there's the way I have to do it, which is basically I have to send someone a letter like every year for 5 consecutive years before I can file an affidavit of cancellation on that property. So it doesn't happen often. It's not something we generally look to do, but it is possible. So that brings us to kind of the water rights transaction question here with in-stream leases and what Sarah's going to touch on, which is that water rights can be transferred in a lot of different ways. I'm not going to get into it. There's a lot of different types of transactions or transfers that can occur. What we're going to focus on today is in-stream transfers or in-stream leases. And if you lease your water in-stream, which can be done for any period, it could be a 1-year period, it could be up to 5 years, I believe, and it can be split season. So, and the leases can get kind of complicated, but generally speaking, those leases will protect your water right. So say you haven't, this is common upriver, not that common, but it's happened with a few properties upriver, where say after the flood, their pump station got washed out and they don't have the money to put all the new infrastructure in place, and they want to protect those water rights. So they're running up on that 5 years, right, since the flood, and they might say, well, I want to protect those water rights, but I don't have the ability to put that pump back in, and I'm not ready to start using my land again for irrigation. So they could contact the department directly, or they could go through the water trust or another group and get those waters, that water leased in stream. And that would then protect their water right. So it resets that 5-year clock essentially. So that's kind of my carrot approach with the in-stream leases. It resets that 5-year non-use portion. So it protects your water right in that regard. They're considered use. So basically an in-stream lease is considered use. So even if you can't use it once you lease it in-stream, it has to dry up. The leases are generally approved much quicker than a transfer. The transfer process can be very long and onerous and take years to get through. Lease usually takes 30 to 45 days, I believe, is kind of the department goal. I don't know if that's been the experience of people who've applied, but that is the goal.
How often do you run into double dipping? Where someone leases the water right in stream and then goes on and irrigates their pasture?
I haven't seen it. Generally speaking, the places I've seen that do leases, they've been leasing for a while. So most of the places I know of the fields are pretty derelict. If they were to do it, it'd probably have to be through flood irrigation. And I haven't seen it. So yeah, but I don't know in the rest of the state how common it is, but here I haven't caught anybody yet. I'll say that. So, but yeah, so that's in-stream leases, and now I'll pass on to Sarah who can give you much more information.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Luke. Like he said, my name's Sarah. I'm with Washington Water Trust. And I'm not going to be spending as much time on water right information or water law information because Luke did a great job of summarizing that. But I'm going to talk to you about water right transactions with the in-stream leases and transfers, which Luke set me up real nice, is that it's a way to protect your water right from forfeiture or cancellation. So a little bit about Washington Water Trust. We're a non-regulatory nonprofit organization with a mission of protecting and restoring in-stream flows for fish. We were founded in 1998, and as the name suggests, we were founded in Washington, and I've primarily worked there. But recently we've gotten funding to expand into Oregon in the Walla Basin. Since fish don't care about state lines, they're going to go where the flow is. We work directly with landowners and water right holders to create what we like to call win-win solutions, benefiting both streams and fish, but also the people and communities that we're working with. Our funding is from private and public sources, and I'll piggyback on your question for our water transactions with our main funder right now. We actually have to do compliance monitoring every year. So we'll actually go to the field, check in with the landowner and make sure that it's dry. So one option for staying in stream. And then we've actually been present in the Walla Basin for about 20 years, but again, mostly on the Washington side. So very excited to get in front of you all today. Again, I'm going to talk a little bit about some best practices and record keeping that I found is really helpful for folks. But most of my presentation is going to be focused on water right transactions, what they are and how they can be helpful for you all for protecting your water rights. And then briefly touch on some resources at the end, including Luke here. So as he mentioned too, there's kind of 4 key takeaways around water law and water rights here in Oregon. Water rights have to be put towards beneficial use without waste. Those uses are normally written on your water rights certificate. It can be anything from irrigation, municipal, domestic, as Luke mentioned. So there's a bunch of different options there. He talked about first in time, first in right, that seniority. as well as the appurtenancy, which water rights are linked to the land. So that's a key takeaway here. And then that 5-year clock, in Washington, we call it a 5-year use it or lose it rule, and it applies here too. You have to use that full beneficial use of your water right, at least once every 5 years. Otherwise, the whole thing or a portion of it could be subject to relinquishment or forfeiture. So to start off first, how do you determine if you have a valid water right? Or how much beneficial use you actually have to work with? There's a couple different resources that you can rely on to pull a lot of those documents. First off, just finding your water right in general, that water right certificate. There's a online mapping tool on Water Resources Department's website, which is really great. You can look up your property, look up if there's any water rights associated with it, and even see all the change history that may have occurred. So that's a great resource. It can also give you other records of use and potentially tell you maybe you don't have a water right, but you're serviced through an irrigation district or ditch company, something like that. So different avenues there. You can always review your property deed. Sometimes this is really helpful since water rights are linked to the land, but sometimes it's just not documented well in those deeds, but it's worth a shot. And you can always call Luke or Water Resources Department to find out more information on if you have a water right and what that's looked like. And then I will say that while you might have that paper water right certificate, more often than not, what you actually have to work with and divert and apply to your land is not those same quantities on the certificate. And unfortunately, that's because over time, and some of these water rights issued more than 100 years ago, you've lost some portion of that to forfeiture. So this is what I always tell people is really trying to firm up what your use history is and what you have to work with now. And it's definitely something the Water Trust can help you with. And once you actually know what that use is and what the beneficial uses that you have to work with, maintaining good records is key. That 5-year clock does exist, and if you can provide any evidence that shows you've been using a portion or all of your water right within those 5 years, even if it's not an in-stream flow transfer, even if you want to do any other change to your water right, you'll need to provide really good evidence that shows and firms up use. Meter and pump records are great. It actually shows what's coming out of the river or your groundwater well. Cropping and seed receipts are also helpful for figuring out water duty and what would then be applied to the land to grow those crops. Sounds really simple, but photographs of turning your equipment on and showing a timestamp, it's not the most proven evidence, but it definitely helps support the fact that you have that on. Affidavits of water use, we've used this in Washington, especially for when property changes ownership, and you might not be as familiar with how your water right's been managed in the past, but somebody else has, and they can testify to that. Google Earth, aerial imagery, there's that toggle where you can go back 5 to 10 years or however. You can really see the change in your property from a high level. Is it green? Is it not? And there are some exemptions for non-use written into Oregon water law that might apply to certain situations. One is a drought declaration, another is economic hardship. So those are other things to consider if you do have gaps in that 5 years. Some of those might apply. So with that being said, how can we help at the Water Trust? All of what I just said is something we call water right due diligence, and we're happy to help you do that, figure out if you have a water right, what that use is, answer any questions, because the hope for us is that there's a flow benefit to your water right, and you might want to protect it in stream, which is where we get water right transactions. These are voluntary projects that we do with water right holders and landowners. to conserve water in stream. And that is through those in-stream leases and transfers of placing water rights into the stream for a specific amount of time. These can be those temporary leases that Luke was talking about, so 1 year, 5 years. Or they can be longer term transfers up to 10 years. And then permanent acquisitions are just as they are, permanent sales. And they're very flexible. You can kind of slice them however you like. It can be your whole water right, portion of it, can be split season like Luke said, or full season, whatever works best for you all and still gives us the flow benefit that we need for the streams. And the best part about this program for you all is that the Water Trust can offer economic incentives through water payments for placing and protecting your water right in stream through water right transactions. And these are based on fair market value prices specific to the Walla Basin here in Oregon. And they're funded both by the private and public entities that also fund our work as well. And so just like we've been talking about, the main way to do water transactions in Oregon is through the in-stream leases and transfers. And exactly like we've said, this is a way to just protect your water right in stream. And then you'd have it, especially for a lease, at any other point, if you want to take it out, once the lease is done, you can put it back to use. But it stops that 5-year clock. So you're protected from forfeiture, even if it's something like you just don't know what you want to do with your farm for the next 5 years, but you know you want to save your water, there could be flow benefit there, and this program could work for you all. Exactly how you put your water right into the lease is exactly how it comes out. So the quantity, the priority date, the other attributes, it all stays the same, which is specific for the leases. Permanent acquisitions are a permanent sale, similar to a real estate transaction. So those would just stay in stream. But the other nice thing about these, besides those water payments, is that Washington Water Trust will handle all the paperwork for you. We'll handle the transaction development and implementation through Oregon Water Resources Department all the way up to payment. So it definitely takes a lot of the lift off your end, and we can handle all of that for you. And then here's the fun part. Water Trust really likes to put water back in stream when and where it's needed. Again, going back to our mission, stream flow focused and fish focused. But that doesn't mean that we can't get really creative and try to also find solutions that are going to work well for you all as water right holders. And so these are a lot of the tools in our toolbox that we can utilize to make these water transactions work. Purchases and leases, we talked a little bit about those, pretty straightforward, same as split season. Maybe you want to irrigate early in the spring and lease your water right in the fall. That'd be a great example of that. Potentially you want to shift to a low or no irrigated crop, so you're having water savings there. Maybe in 5 to 10 years you want to switch back. You can protect that water through a lease, and therefore it won't get forfeited or canceled. We have dry year or drought option agreements. These are short-term. We've used in parts of Washington before. Source switches. You have a surface water right, and potentially you have a water right for groundwater on your property. Maybe you just need the groundwater right, so you lease the surface water. Keep that in stream. Point of diversion changes, irrigation efficiencies, water payments can help offset some of those costs, but give you time to protect your water while you're putting in the infrastructure or planning what you want to do next. Storage releases, off-channel storage, and this last one is fun because it's a combination with land conservation. And so different opportunities for restoration and conservation easements can definitely have a water right component and an in-stream flow component, and really come up with some fun multi-benefit projects. So now I also have some examples that I'll take you through, and then we're almost there to questions. This transaction in the Tuchy River was a permanent sale of a water right. We worked with a landowner up there who really was just sick of moving hand lines. So he decided to sell his water right to us, so we got a full in-stream flow benefit. But he actually was able to switch to dry farmed wheat. And so his land still remains in production and he still gets a profit that way as well. So definitely a win for him and a win for the Tuchy. This one, on the Walla River is another example of kind of a straightforward transaction. But it first was in a lease, a 5-year lease, and then it went to a permanent acquisition. The 5-year lease, granted this landowner some time to figure out what she wanted to do with her property, lease the land, use her water. She ultimately did end up selling her water rights, for in-stream flow. But again, that lease kind of gave her that grace period to decide what she wanted to do, protected her water in stream, and if she did want to use it again, she'd be able to. That one has formatting here. This next example is actually in the Teanaway River in the Upper Yakima Basin in Washington. Last year, the picture on the left, after Washington State declared its drought emergency, the Teanaway River definitely dropped very, very low, too low for fish, too low for Fish and Wildlife to feel comfortable. So we worked with 3 landowners in that valley and had a specific amount of acreage that they agreed to fallow for a month period of time. And so those agreements were put in place, and then after some compliance monitoring at the end of that period, they got economically rewarded for keeping their water right in stream for that period of time. So that's an example of a drought program that we may be able to do here. And another example of just a short turnaround lease.
Would you mind explaining those pictures?
Oh, yeah, please. On the left is a picture right below, it's called Red Bridge on the Teanaway River, and I want to say it's around River Mile 5. And that pinch point is a specific point where Fish and Wildlife and the Water Trust know that a certain amount of water needs to be in the river for fish passage. And so we got this picture because clearly no fish are getting up there right now. But that was taken in August of last year. And then the picture on the right is actually at the start of August, the start of compliance for these leases. So the field still looks green, even though it's being fallowed, but by the end of that time, there was no, not a lot of green grass left, but there's supposed to be a center pivot in the back. It's hard to see, but the point is that it's not on. So that was part of our under compliance.
So these aren't next to each other or anything?
They aren't, they're just in the same valley. So the water that was going to be put on this field ended up back
in the stream. Now I get it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's not reflected in that picture, right?
It is not
Yeah,
reflected in that picture.
That confused me.
No, that picture is a before picture. I'll send out an after picture.
Yeah, it made it look like all of a sudden this, it had turned into a field and.
This is good feedback. I like this.
That
This is
one's
good
more
feedback.
straightforward.
This one's much more straightforward, before, after. This is a picture from, Salmon Creek in the Okanagan Basin in Washington. And this transaction is a bit of, an example of kind of larger scale dealing with an irrigation district. We have a permanent agreement with that district to release water every year when fish are migrating, so it's a storage release agreement. And so the district gets paid, but every year we get flows added to Salmon Creek that actually lets fish pass up. So, I forget when this was implemented, very early on, but definitely Salmon Creek flows majority because of this project. So those are my examples of water transactions. Just wanted to leave you all with a couple other resources that are available to you all. Water right attorneys and consultants can do all of the water right due diligence that we do, developing transactions, and, you know, shepherding those transactions through approval. we are free, so that's really nice. Quick plug for us. Water Resources Department, their online mapping tool, again, I can send out a link to that, but really, really helpful just to collect some base knowledge about your property and your water rights. OWRD staff and group in the back, great local resources that can answer questions. And then this, they have a really nice introduction to Oregon water laws on their website. It's a really straightforward PDF with a lot of great takeaways. That has been really useful for me as I've been learning Oregon water law, so I can also send that around. And then your Watershed Council, also great resources here. Doing great work in the basin, but also are very well connected. If you have any questions, they can definitely point you in the right direction.
Thank you.
And with that, I think Luke and I will take questions.
I'm pretty sure I know what the answer is on this one. Just curious, because there's a property right next to where I live, and someone's been talking about they want to buy that property. But whoever lived there just allowed the water right just to go and never utilized it, right? And so like now there's technically, I guess, not a water right on that property. So the water that was deemed for that area and allocated is now, where is it? Like, what happens to that?
If it's not actually valid anymore and being taken out of stream, it's left in stream for it to flow as long as another senior user doesn't take it.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not mine, it's like.
No, but I mean, in
Yes.
that area.
Yeah,
where you're
probably
at.
groundwater, yeah, it's not stream.
Then it's stand below
Just
ground.
going
Yeah,
back into it.
Yeah.
And like, there's no redemption of that, like, if someone wanted to go buy that property and like build back the vines that are in that area, it's like, it's dead, so. I assume.
pretty much. There is like a period. If it hasn't been reported and technically really gone through the process of either being forfeited or canceled or relinquished, there could be some opportunity, but you'd really have to firm up history.
Yeah.
If you wanted to do any changes, agency's probably gonna flag that. So you'd have to use water consistently for a while before you did anything with it, but, yeah, most likely it's done.
So the land is worthless.
Yeah.
It definitely is a decrease in value. There's,
If you're looking to drip irrigate some vines in the area for that, which is all that property is, which is a half an acre or some vines.
Park a bunch of semis on it. yes.
Yeah.
yeah, it definitely,
we raised that.
the loss of a water right can decrease your land value, but it definitely adds a lot of other, qualities to the basin streams, and, there are other options like conservation easements that could add a ton of benefit, so there are different ways to keep that value.
So in a hypothetical, if I have two water rights on my property, and one is a surface water right and it's a primary, and then I have a groundwater right and that's a secondary. And so let's just say that I leased my in-stream surface water right. And the groundwater right is secondary, and I no longer have the surface water right. And historically, I've been using, let's say, 1.5 acre feet of water out of the well, groundwater, but now I no longer have the surface water, so I can I or can I not use the secondary right beyond the 1.5 acre feet? The paper right of the well would be like 4 acre feet. Right? Now I don't have the surface water, can I go from 1.5 to 2.5 or 3 acre feet of water on the well? Given that it's also, you know, in an area that's distressed, as we talk about, everybody's sucking air, digging deeper, whatever. What's the answer to that?
So the primary, secondary, I might look to Luke to help me answer. You can't exceed the quantity of water listed on your paper water right. And again, if you go through that change process and in the last 5 years, you have only been using an acre, 1.5 acre feet from that well, most likely the change might reduce that water right.
Well, the supplemental right, my understanding is, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty positive that if you transfer your primary in stream, your supplemental's off. You have to dry up that ground, because if you Because then you're basically because then you're basically putting your supplemental as your primary.
So you can't do
You
that.
can't do that.
That's
Basically,
my
if you're, unless you have, I don't know how. Basically, if you transfer your primary water right in the street, the ground is dried up. I don't know of a way you could still put water on.
The supplemental is contingent on the primary being there.
Yes, it's like if your primary gets canceled, your supplemental is not valid. You have to have a primary for a supplemental.
Got it. So this is a sticky widget about value of water rights, I'm just gonna ask you to throw a dart over your shoulder at the barn wall behind you, kind of value, but because it depends on priority, where it is, and the stream, what time of year, how much, QI and QA.
Yeah.
But that said, what's an average, as if that existed, going rate for an acre foot of water? Or do you do it by CFS, instantaneous versus quantity?
Mostly we do it by acre feet because we often find, especially from a landowner or water right holder point of view, it's a lot easier to comprehend in your head. I can give you more of a range, in leases. It's, and again, you bring up a good point, priority, where you are in the stream, all plays a factor. Leases, it can be anywhere from like $10 per acre foot, up here in Oregon, $40 per acre foot-ish. Purchases are gonna be definitely more, probably around $1,000 to $1,500 per acre foot. Again, depending on all those factors. And our transactions are also contingent on a funder saying yes to the project and wanting to fund it, so that's another piece. So it's up to us to really, that's why we shore up your beneficial use and really make the package tight, and then really describe the why this water right is important to the basin, to make that compelling.
So how long might that process go? So if landowner comes forward to you and said they'd like to lease this, then you need to put it together and then put it to your funder? And how long does that find out?
So, it's almost like parallel tracks that we like to do, and I'm gonna give timeframes more for Washington, because that's what I'm more familiar with. But I do think for Oregon leases, it is like 30 to 45 day approval. But, when we get contact with the landowner, it's normally like a month or two of conversation, depending on how complicated it is to figure out what their water right is like, what project they want to do, and kind of negotiate what that looks like, and negotiate potential prices based on what we know about the basin. And those are subject to change. And from there, we'd sign agreements, and then I would start applying for funding, which right now through our main funder, which is National Fish and Wildlife, that can take anywhere from like 3 to 6 months for full lease approval. And then that parallel track would be me going through OWRD or in Washington Ecology at the same time. OWRD, I think, is a little quicker to process than ecology. So, with ecology, it can sometimes take upwards of a year. So I think part of my job really is having constant communication with water right holders and really being realistic about the timeline, because that's the worst if I just overpromise and can't deliver. So, but again, part of our job is to really stick on them and try to get that paperwork at the top of their stack always. So I would say start to finish about a year, would be my best guess, but definitely could vary depending on how large the project is or how in depth the change is, that sort of thing.
How similar are the water right laws in Washington?
As a person that's mostly familiar with Washington, there's definitely some similarities, especially around like those 4 basic principles and the fact that water is a public resource. I think a lot of that is similar. There's definitely different programs available and processing time and, ways to review and calculate, water quantities that's a bit different. I'm still exploring a lot of the nuances of that, so I don't know.
Yeah, I don't really know Washington water law at all. I would say that in general, like the things I covered, they're probably very similar. But once you get into the nitty gritty of transactions, et cetera, how they track things, how they process things, it can be very different. But they still use prior appropriation, they still have primary and supplemental, they still have, I think they might call it supplemental something different. But it's all very similar.
And in Washington, the way to protect, water rights in stream is the Washington State Trust Water Rights Program. And so, instead of going through like an in-stream lease or transfer application, you go through a change process that places that water into the program, and it's almost like a water bank, like it's held there for in-stream flow, can be protected and called upon based on priority. But similarly to these leases, just so that it goes in, it comes out, it can be a lease, it can be a permanent acquisition, so there's definitely similarities there.
The terminology is very different in Washington.
Yeah.
I actually didn't realize this till a few months ago, they call it trust water. It
Yeah.
took me a while to realize that what we call in-stream water, they call trust water. It's like an interchangeable term.
Yeah.
So in Oregon, we generally call that in-stream rights, or in-stream lease. We just call it in-stream in the department generally, they call it trust water.
And that's run by the state, and I also get a lot of questions of, is it my trust program, because we're called Washington Water Trust. It's a terrible name pick at the time, I wish I could name it, yeah, it's not ours.
So is there not a water trust in the state of Oregon outside of Basin?
There's different entities that do the same work we do. Trout Unlimited is active and does that same work. I think at one time Freshwater Trust was over here too. There's definitely different trusts, in both Washington and Oregon, and, us being a part of National Fish and Wildlife's Columbia Basin Water Transactions Program, long acronym. There's qualified local entities doing this work throughout the Columbia Basin, so all 3 states.
Are you a Washington State employee or what?
No, I work for, Washington Water Trust is a nonprofit, non-regulatory.
Regulatory?
Yeah, so another benefit to us is working with us to dive into your water rates. It's all confidential until you get to the point of signing paperwork and submitting it to OWRD. So anything that we would discuss remains between us. I don't have any obligation to report it.
And question for you, you said prior appropriation or a water right that's earlier. What happens when you hit state line, Washington? Some of them have water rights that are older than ours.
There is a Supreme Court decision on that. I don't remember when, a long time ago, and I do not know it very well. So what I can tell you is, generally speaking, we don't, once it hits the state line, like if someone in Washington calls me, I tell them to call the Washington Water Master, and vice versa. So that happens on occasion. I actually have an issue right now with someone who is having trouble accessing the point of diversion in Oregon for their Washington water rights. And I'm going through that process, like, I basically told her, I don't know if there's anything I can do for you, because we don't really honor, now, some people, maybe someone in this room even, do have Oregon water rights in the state of Washington. But it's very uncommon, there's only a few. Similar, actually, there's some users in Oregon that have a call on water from Washington off of the Gardene industry. So it can get a little complicated, but generally speaking, the state line is sort of a cutoff. I don't go to Washington.
Yeah, I believe this Supreme Court said if it starts in Oregon, it belongs to Oregon.
I think that's the general gist, but again, I'm not a lawyer, so don't get into the nitty gritty of that, so.
might be a really big question, but with the USGS doing their groundwater survey, do you see an opportunity, once we figure out how all the shallow aquifers are connected, that maybe there could be some opportunity to trust like at shallow aquifers if it shows the connection to surface water?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I don't know if we've thought about that yet, but it's worth exploring.
And you've got a couple years until the finding are released, but.
No, it's a good point. It would definitely, tap into some water that we haven't thought about protecting, and in different ways. So, yeah, it's worth exploring for sure. Thank you.
I have a question regarding that 5-year, that you were talking about. I recently sold my Washington family farm and had, water rights, there, but in the flood, the pump got taken out and I hadn't replaced it yet. So do I need to make sure to tell the people who bought my property to get something in place so they don't lose that?
That would be nice. I don't think there's any, law in Washington that says you have to, but that
No,
would
but-
really consider.
But I mean, I grew up on the farm and we watered our property, grew crops on it for many, many years. And to lose that wouldn't be a good idea, but I just figured out how to make it work. Well, I didn't grow anything, on that part of the property. And so it sounds like if they want to keep that water right, I need to get them going quickly.
You can,
Get that done.
yeah, the other option is to, and I can give you my card after this, in Washington, we could do the same leases and purchases, but there's also a really easy donation process that you can donate your water into the state trust program, and it will also stop that clock. So it buys them a little time to kind of ease in and figure out what they might want to
Okay, I'll
do.
take your card over
Yeah.
there and make sure that, as I know they were counting on the water, so I better make sure that that doesn't happen.
Yeah, and if they're not ready to install anything this year, the donation would be great. That would be my advice is definitely let them know and have them start using it,
Okay.
as quickly as possible, yeah.
Very helpful, thank you.
I'm really gonna show my ignorance here.
Go for it.
So help me to understand the domestic exempt well situation. Everybody says we're overextended, but is there? I mean, people buy their plot of land and then they want to drill a well. Is there any restrictions on the number of exempt wells that can go in, or? I mean, they all add up.
Death by 1,000 pinpricks.
So I was visiting with some people in the Met Town a couple of years ago, and they bought their dream property, and they were gonna build their dream home and sink a well, and they were told, no, you can't. And then, so they lived in a yurt for a couple of years, and then apparently that moratorium was lifted, and they were able to sink the well and carry on. So, I mean, I'm sure this is, watershed by watershed. I mean, I'm not sure. I'm ignorant on this, but help me to understand that part.
I don't know of anywhere in Oregon where there's a domestic use, restriction. I only work in this part of the state, but yeah, if someone buys a piece of property in the Walla Basin in Oregon, they can drill a well for domestic use. They have to hire a driller, the driller has to get a start card, they have to go through the right process, just like everybody does. But I don't know of any instance where we told people, no, you can't drill a domestic well. That doesn't mean it hasn't, or I don't know, statewide, but here, to my knowledge, I don't even know how we would deny it. I don't know if there's a process for that. Unless there's something wrong with the start card or with the driller's license.
Yeah, I don't think there's a restriction on the number that you can, drill either. I know communities have to plan for it in their development plans, and I think that Upper Columbia area of the Metro, I know they've been looking for senior water rights, to help mitigate that groundwater use. And I think they've just gotten a grant to start a water bank to help, facilitate some of that. But in the Walla Walla, it's still a learning edge for me. I'm also still a little bit ignorant in this. It's really confusing and it's kind of complicated with how many, the counties involved. In some places, water banks are involved, so it can get complicated, but I can definitely follow up and find more information for you too.
So I just want to play out a scenario just to, for my own identification. So if we have somebody who owns, 100 acres of dry land wheat, and they parcel it out. And so now they have 10 new landowners, for instance, that are each gonna drill a well. And those people can irrigate their lawn, right?
Up to half acre.
Yeah.
After, yeah, half acre is a lot of water.
Half acre and 5,000 gallons.
Yeah, okay, so those people, their water use is exponential compared to the 100 acres of dry land wheat. So how does this sustain, right?
Well, in Oregon, it'd be really hard, I think, to get, as far as zoning goes, at least in this county, in Umatilla County. Like, it would be very difficult to parcel it out and build on it in that way. But I don't want.
Well, that's a good point, yeah.
I don't know the county rules that well, but I know when I was looking at property, purchased my farm, I purchased a place with a house on it and a field with good water, right? Because I didn't want to have to guess at any of those things. And that's one of the things I researched was in Umatilla County, it's really hard to just buy a virgin piece of ground and build a house on it and develop it with the EFD zone.
And that's the same in Walla Walla. It's very hard to divide property in Walla Walla.
And I know a lot of counties do map out in development areas like red and green zones that have different mitigation requirements too. So that could be some sort of restriction, whether you're in one of those zones. But yeah, I think zoning would definitely come into play there.
You are correct though that the Oregon Water Research Department, we don't have a rule that I know of that will restrict people from drilling wells, domestic wells, splitting up land, all that. That's, my department does not get involved in property at all. So
That's county.
that's all county. So my department would say, sure. But
So I don't know a lot about this either, so I'll just keep my big mouth shut, but I was wondering if on that question of your friends in the Med Town, didn't Washington have a rule recently about looking at how groundwater withdrawals can affect surface water and they need to study it first to see if groundwater withdrawal is gonna affect nearby surface water before they can grant exempt use even, maybe? I might be wrong about that.
I'd have to phone a friend, my colleague Ethan, who has better recall than I do. But I think, you are correct, and it's coming into play in one of our projects, actually in the Tiana Way, about how the surface and groundwater are connected, and they, probably are gonna halt a lot of, mitigated wells in that particular valley because of that. But it definitely varies basin by basin, sub-basin by sub-basin. And there's a lot of research that needs to go into it, but I think the point you bring up is a lot, I think people are asking more questions now. Like, how does this actually work? But I'd have to phone a friend on that one, but I can follow up with you too.
Oh, I have a question. Is the exempt well, does it matter if you were drawing from the wheel or the salt aquifer?
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
For a domestic well, this isn't really my world. I don't really do well compliance. We have a guy in Pendleton who does it for our district, but my understanding is you can drill your domestic well. I mean, again, according to the rules of the state, TP1.
The critical groundwater area doesn't affect that rule at all.
No, granted, I mean, again, this isn't my department necessarily, but I mean, drilling with a salt well, I did talk to someone recently that got an estimate from a driller on a few hundred feet of salt well, you're talking $40,000.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's not, you're not, you know, generally speaking, unless you're building some really big house somewhere and has a lot of money to spend, you're not gonna be putting a well into salt for investment purposes, but some people probably have it, I'm sure. But generally speaking, in this basin, they're mostly shallow or piggybacking on an agricultural one. So, don't know, again, we don't necessarily track those either, we don't have a great list of all the domestic wells, it's a lot of them were drilled before the records were acquired.
Another short question, I think this is short. So someone from Walla came to my office the other day saying, my wife's a prepper and she wants me to dig a 10-foot deep well in the backyard so that I have access. Can I do that? And I said, I don't think you can. But, so that doesn't count. I mean, it doesn't matter how deep it is, right? You can't dig down and withdraw groundwater. It doesn't matter if you have it cased, not cased, officially drilled or not.
I don't know the reason why.
But I think the question is, there water available even 10 feet back? Or no?
They're
Yeah.
nervous if my water is.
Yeah, you'll be having some flooding.
There are
There's
areas
also
where the water
some
table
things-
comes clear up to the surface.
Yeah, we
Right.
had a nearby well, like a few years of monitoring data from nearby well that was in like, Howard and Tyson Park. The water is not very deep there. The
I
groundwater
think
is.
in Oregon, if your intent was to dig a hole in any way to install a well, you would be required to have a licensed driller with a start card. I think, don't quote me on that, because that's a pretty, this is a pretty,
Sure, yeah.
different question than I'm used to, but that would be my guess. Now, I don't know, again, I don't know the nitty gritty there, because it's like, if you're right next to a stream, could you just dig a 5-foot hole and put a big piece of PVC in it and have your well? That would not be allowed,
Right.
but you can dig a hole on your property, my department doesn't have anything to say about it, so that's where it gets,
Sure.
I think the short answer would be, if their intent is to put in a well, they need a licensed driller with a start card.
Tell her to have him build a bomb shelter and then just put a hole out there for the water to come. Be really easy.
Thank you.
And both of your cards are up there for people to get in contact.
Cards,
Luke and Sarah.
yeah. Luke's got some paperwork, I have water transaction facts.
And if you guys are ever more curious about more water rights in Washington, we're holding another one of these talks similar, come April 24th. Thank you, at the Water and Environmental Center, at the Community College of Walla. Located in the flood. The Walla Conservation District.
How does your water rights and injection? Like, is it similar to what we've been talking about?
I understand.